Fall is a great time to apply fertilizer.
Well, I like spring, Brian. Spring's a great time to apply fertilizer.
Well, if I get my fertilizer applied in the fall, then it's all done. I don't have to worry about it come spring.
But there's lots of other jobs you could be doing in the fall that, maybe are more important than putting on fertilizer too.
Well, yes, but I can usually buy my fertilizer cheaper in the fall.
Yeah, but if you're putting it on in the spring, you're putting it on right when the crop's going to need it, and that's a pretty handy thing too.
Okay, you can see by now that there are a lot of good arguments to go either way, putting your fertilizer on in the fall or the spring. We wanted to talk about those just a little bit today. Let me first tell you that on our farm, when given the choice, we do want to get our work done in the fall and put that fertilizer on in the fall, but we have a few guidelines here that I think are very important to follow.
Well, in the fall, when you can get stuff done, if you are blessed by not getting snowfall, especially in the northern corn belt, you got to stay out there and keep working because you never know what the spring's going to be like. And you know your crop is going to need nutrients. The big thing is just putting them out there where the crop can use them and not running any problems over the winter. So what kind of guidelines would we give?
Well, let's start with nitrogen. With nitrogen, that's the one we have to worry about the most. We're not that concerned if you're putting anhydrous ammonia out very late in the fall. We'd like to do this in our region in the northern corn belt after November 1st, usually about the time the soil temp is dropping below 50 degrees. The reason why we want to do that is so we have very little nitrogen loss. The other thing, if you're going to put nitrogen out in the fall, like we say, use anhydrous ammonia, but then also make sure you know where you're placing that.
Now, for the ground we're farming, there's a couple of things we watch out for. For one, we don't want to put anything out on river bottom ground that could potentially flood out next spring. So we're definitely going to do it on ground that's upland ground, not in jeopardy of flooding. And the other thing would just be looking at soil texture. If we've got some real sandy soil that just can't hold nutrients, we aren't going to do it because there's a chance that we'd lose it due to leaching. So we try to find medium to heavy textured soils that we aren't going to have problems getting into next spring.
Okay, the other thing is what form of nitrogen you're going to use. We don't ever recommend putting liquid 28% out in the fall unless it's a low rate just for helping with breakdown of residue. The other one is urea. Urea also, just like anhydrous, we would suggest you do that very late. But urea, there's a little more chance you're going to lose it as compared to anhydrous when you place the anhydrous deep in the soil. Other things you can do to help your nitrogen stay good until spring are put things with it like Nutrisphere, for example.
You could do things like Nutrisphere to protect that nitrogen so it won't be broken down and turned into nitrates, which are more likely to leach down through the soil. It's a chemical reaction.
Or ammonia, so it doesn't vaporize up in the air. We just don't want to lose it either way, either in the air or down deep in the ground.
So those are big things with nitrogen. Place it on ground you know you can get into in the spring and also where it's not going to leach. If you would like to as well, you can protect that nitrogen so you don't have to put added amounts of nitrogen out there. Just put out what you need and then protect what you're putting out there.
Okay, let's talk about the other main things that will apply on our farm in the fall. That's phosphorus and potassium. We don't have the same concerns that we do with nitrogen. So for example, we can put phosphorus and potassium out early. We can put them on in August or September or October. It's not that big a deal. We can put those products out and not have to worry about them leaching. We'll even put them on our river bottom ground as long as they're down deep in the soil because we know even if the ground floods out, those things aren't going to filter down through the soil. Yes, we have to worry about erosion with P and K if the dirt actually leaves the field, but as long as we're placing the P and K down below the surface of the soil, we're generally speaking pretty safe.
Well, that's fine. You can put it out there, but things like phosphorus get tied up very, very easily. So you have to protect that phosphorus. If you're going to put it out, especially when you're putting it out in the fall, you've got a long time there for that soil to tie that phosphorus up so it's unavailable for your crop. And that's a great spot for fall phosphorus applications to use Avail. Avail will tie up all those positively charged cations that are trying to tie up that fertilizer. So the fertilizer is available for your crop in the spring. And the cool thing is it's usually good for about 10 to 12 months. So yeah, you can put it out right now and you're good all through next season.
Yeah, another thing that you can do if you want to have better availability is to band them, especially deep banding them, with something like strip till. We do a fair amount of that on our farm. Now, we also do some broadcast, but where we broadcast, we use higher rates of P and K because we know the interception rate of the roots to that P&K, it's going to be much better when we're placing it directly below where we're going to plant in the spring.
So with P&K, it really doesn't matter if you're putting them out in the spring or fall, that's fine. With nitrogen, there's some added concerns. With micronutrients, it's kind of the same thing. You can put your micronutrients out in the fall if you would like. A lot of times on our farm, we're putting them out as a liquid with our starter or pop-up or however we decide to do fertilizer with the planter.
Because we want it close to where that plant is going to be, and we're just using very low rates, so it's not a big deal. One last thing before we end this discussion, I just wanted to mention with potash, if you are using potash on your farm, the dry product, keep in mind that's a rock. Okay, so the earlier you can get potash out in the fall, the better off you generally are. In other words, if you're talking about putting potash on in the spring, right at planting time, chances are very little of that potash is going to be available for your corn crop, and maybe even it won't be available for your bean crop. Remember that corn needs its nutrients real early in the year, especially P&K. Soybeans, that crop needs its nutrients later in the season. That's just a big difference between corn and soybeans. Soybeans, a lot of the nutrients are taken up in July and August. Corn, it's a lot different. A lot of those nutrients are pulled up in May and June.
And we would like to get a lot of this work done in the fall if we can, just so we don't have so many things to do in the spring. But again, if we don't get it all done in the fall, we aren't scared at all about putting on fertilizer in the spring too. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So don't panic if you happen to be blessed with some early snowfall.
Yeah, and to Darren's point, in the spring, you can combine trips with things. There are a lot of people that will put all their fertilizer on with the planter. You can use good liquid products. Just make sure you're using something that's very safe if you choose to do that. But there are a lot of good arguments, once again, going back to applying fall versus spring. But on our farm, if we can, we like to do a lot of that work in the fall.
Well, one other thing we like to do in the fall is make sure there are no weed problems out there that are going to bite us in the spring. Can you identify this week's weed of the week?